Warning: this episode discusses an alleged political attack, disputed claims, and rapidly evolving media narratives. Some reporting cited in this discussion changed over time. Some early claims were later clarified or revised. We are not asserting intent. We are not assigning guilt. We are examining timelines, public statements, and the gap between what was said and what was observed. Because in a functioning society, skepticism is not cruelty, and questions are not threats. Listener discretion advised.
Something happened. And then the story outran the facts. Before confirmation, before protocol, before anyone paused long enough to ask, does this actually make sense? A moment became a headline. A headline became a narrative. And that narrative hardened before the details even had a chance to catch up. In an era where attention moves faster than verification, the loudest version of a story usually wins, even when it's wrong, incomplete, or exaggerated. And once words like assassination attempt enter the public space, they don't just inform people, they prime them. Tonight isn't about outrage, it's about restraint. Because when every incident is treated like the end of democracy, real danger stops standing out. Credibility erodes, skepticism becomes taboo, and asking basic questions gets confused with cruelty. This isn't denial, it's discernment. This is data and dissonance. Let's bring in the crew. I'm Artie, and tonight we're slowing the tape down. Not to inflame, not to excuse, but to examine what actually happened versus how it was framed. Brian's here bringing MAGA fire and zero patience for narrative theater. Rachel's here with balance, context, and the uncomfortable habit of asking follow-up questions. Daniel's connecting dots everyone pretends aren't connected. And Skylar's here to challenge us from the progressive side, pushing back on power, intent, and how these moments land with real people watching. No hysteria, no absolutes, just facts, patterns, and the questions nobody wants asked. Over the weekend, Representative Ilhan Omar claimed she was the target of an attempted assassination after being sprayed with a liquid during a public appearance. Within hours, headlines used words like toxic substance and attack, before any official medical report, before law enforcement clarification. Later reporting acknowledged the substance was water mixed with apple cider vinegar, and notably, there was no immediate medical response, no evacuation, and no interruption of the event. That doesn't mean nothing happened, but it does mean the language escalated faster than the facts. And once words like assassination attempt enter the public space, they don't just describe an event, they shape reactions, justify responses, and shut down skepticism. So tonight, we're not asking who to blame. We're asking whether the narrative matches the reality on the ground. Brian, what was the first thing about this story that didn't line up for you?
The first thing that didn't sit right was how quickly the language escalated compared to how calmly everything on the ground seemed to unfold. We're talking about a sitting member of Congress at a public event with security present, and yet the reaction didn't resemble anything close to a credible assassination attempt. No immediate removal, no visible medical assessment, no sense of urgency at all. Instead, the headline raced ahead using the most extreme terminology possible, and once that label was out there, it framed the entire conversation before anyone had a chance to verify what actually happened. And then the details started trickling in, and they made the story even harder to reconcile with the initial claims. When the substance was clarified as water mixed with apple cider vinegar, it raised obvious questions about proportionality and credibility. That doesn't mean the act was appropriate or harmless, but words matter, especially in an environment already primed for panic and outrage. If every confrontation is immediately branded as an assassination attempt, the public stops being able to distinguish between real, imminent threats and moments that are being rhetorically inflated for effect.
And that's where I'm with you, because the issue isn't whether it was wrong, it obviously was. It's whether the response matched the claim. Language like assassination attempt isn't descriptive. It's explosive. It shapes public perception instantly, and once that bell's rung, there's no unringing it. When the physical response from security doesn't match the verbal escalation from the media, that disconnect becomes the story. Rachel, building off Brian's point about escalation and proportionality, when authorities genuinely believe a substance poses a serious threat, what normally happens? And what stands out to you as missing in this situation?
When there is a credible concern that a dangerous or toxic substance has been deployed, the response is immediate and procedural. Security removes the protected individual from the scene, medical personnel are brought in without delay, and the event is either paused or shut down entirely until the risk is assessed. These protocols exist not for optics, but to minimize uncertainty, because in those moments you don't assume the substance is harmless, you assume the opposite until proven otherwise. What stands out here is not just one missing step, but an entire chain of absent reactions. There was no visible medical evaluation, no decontamination, no disruption of the event, and no indication that those responsible for security believed there was an ongoing threat. That gap between the alleged severity of the incident and the real-world response is important, because it suggests that the people closest to the situation did not perceive it as an imminent danger at the time. That doesn't negate the seriousness of confronting or harassing an elected official, but it does call into question whether the narrative that followed accurately reflected the reality on the ground.
That distinction matters, because there's a big difference between something being inappropriate or unacceptable and something being an attempted assassination. When protocols designed for genuine threats aren't triggered, it tells us how the situation was understood in real time, before headlines, before social media amplification, before political framing set in. Rachel pointed out the gap between real-world protocol and the narrative that followed. When you zoom out beyond this one incident, what broader pattern does this fit into for you?
What this fits into is a recurring pattern where emotional framing consistently outruns verification, especially when the story can be weaponized politically. We've seen it over and over again. An incident occurs, early language is deliberately maximalist, and by the time clarifications arrive, the public has already internalized the most extreme version of events. The correction never travels as far as the accusation, because the emotional payoff has already been delivered. That's not accidental. It's structural. Media incentives reward urgency and outrage far more than restraint or precision. What makes this particularly concerning is how quickly skepticism itself is reframed as malice. Asking basic questions about timelines, substances, or security responses becomes interpreted as an attack on the person involved rather than an examination of the claim. That shift creates a kind of narrative shield, where the story is protected from scrutiny not by evidence, but by moral pressure. Over time, that erodes trust, not just in media, but in real warnings, because people start to assume that every alert is exaggerated until proven otherwise.
And that erosion is the real cost. When the public learns that the loudest claims are often the least verified, people stop listening when it actually matters. That's not just bad journalism, it's dangerous. Because credibility is a finite resource, and once it's burned for political theater, it doesn't come back when there's a real fire. Skylar, Daniel talked about how narrative escalation can erode trust over time. From your perspective, especially coming from the progressive side, what responsibility exists to be careful with language that carries serious real-world consequences?
There is a responsibility, and it's one progressives don't always want to admit because it complicates the moral clarity people crave. Language like assassination attempt isn't just descriptive, it's incendiary. And once it's used, it sets expectations for fear, retaliation, and escalation. Even when intentions are good, exaggeration can backfire because it trains people to tune out or assume bad faith the next time something serious actually happens. Accountability doesn't disappear just because someone is politically aligned with you. I also think there's a tendency on the left to assume that questioning a narrative automatically means minimizing harm, and that's a mistake. You can acknowledge that an act was wrong, threatening, or unacceptable without immediately assigning it the most extreme possible label. Precision matters, especially in a climate where people already feel like institutions exaggerate threats to control public reaction. If progressives want credibility when calling out real injustice or real danger, they have to be willing to apply the same standards of evidence and restraint they demand from everyone else.
And that's an important point, because this isn't about protecting one side or attacking another. It's about protecting credibility itself. When language gets inflated for emotional or political effect, it doesn't just distort one story. It poisons the well for every story that comes after it. What we're really talking about tonight isn't Ilhan Omar as a person. It's the system that turns moments into narratives before facts have a chance to breathe. When escalation replaces verification and moral pressure replaces evidence, everyone loses, including the people these stories are supposedly meant to protect. Questioning inconsistencies isn't cruelty. Demanding precision isn't denial. And if words like assassination attempt are going to mean anything in the future, they have to be used carefully in the present. Otherwise, the next real warning might sound just like noise. Before we step away for a second, I want to underline something that came up across the panel. Everyone here acknowledged the same baseline truth. Confronting or harassing an elected official is wrong. Full stop. That part isn't in dispute. What is in dispute is whether the most extreme possible language was justified, and whether using it immediately helps or hurts public trust. Because once the word assassination is used, the conversation changes. Fear enters the room. Lines harden, and nuance becomes suspect. That's why slowing these moments down matters. Not to protect power, but to protect credibility.
Quick pause. And this matters more than people realize. Shows like this don't survive on algorithms or corporate sponsorships. They survive because listeners decide that calm, long-form discussion is worth supporting in a culture addicted to outrage. If that's you, check out the Data and Dissonance merch store. We've got new designs up, classic patriotic gear, and our US roasted coffee blends. Because real conversations take time, and caffeine helps. Every purchase helps keep this show independent, unscripted, and willing to ask questions without clearing them with anyone first. The link's in the description. All right, let's close this out.
What moments like this really test isn't our politics, it's our discipline. The temptation, especially in a hypercharged media environment, is to rush immediately to the most extreme framing possible because intensity travels faster than accuracy. But when language like assassination attempt is deployed before facts are established, it doesn't just describe an event, it reshapes it. Fear enters the room, skepticism is treated as hostility, and the public is emotionally cornered before they've had time to process what actually occurred. That isn't accountability, it's pressure. The problem with that approach is that it slowly degrades trust across the board. When people see a gap between the narrative they're given and the reality they observe, whether it's missing protocols, shifting explanations, or quiet walkbacks, they don't just question one story, they start questioning all of them. And that's dangerous, because credibility is not infinite. It's built slowly and lost quickly, and every time it's spent on exaggeration or premature certainty, it's unavailable when something truly serious happens. This isn't about denying wrongdoing, minimizing threats, or protecting anyone from scrutiny. It's about insisting that words mean something, especially the biggest ones. Skepticism is not cruelty. Asking questions is not violence. And slowing down a story isn't an attack on truth, it's how truth survives. If we want the public to take real warnings seriously, then we have to stop treating every incident like the final chapter before the facts are even written. Remember to speak truth, stir thought.
Tonight's episode is brought to you by the Caleb Rourke thriller series, The Covenant Protocol, The Prophet Directive, and Black Echo Rising. These aren't sanitized thrillers. They're stories about power, corruption, media pressure, and what happens when truth gets buried under narrative. Available now on Amazon. Links are in the